Why are we afraid to hire junior Rails developers? Or why does it seem like all the junior devs are learning JavaScript? So, I'm Joe Masilotti. I'm the founder of RailsDevs, which is a reverse job board exclusively for Ruby on Rails developers. The goal of this talk is to kickstart a culture shift to include more junior developers in the Rails community. The most important thing to take away is that every single person in this room can help. Hiring managers are going to learn what to look for and how to hire junior devs. Senior developers are going to learn how to level up juniors to their own benefit. And junior devs are going to learn how to land their first job and stand out from the crowd. This talk is what I've learned from helping companies hire via RailsDevs for the past year, and from being a developer myself for the past decade or so. I'm not claiming to be an expert, but these are techniques and stories that I've seen work over the past 12 months of hiring. The best time to plant a tree was 3 years ago. And the second best time is now. I'm sure you've seen this on your Airbnb wall or scrolling through your Instagram feed. It's pretty common. It's kind of late. I like to make one tweak to it. The best time to hire a junior developer was 3 years ago. The second best time is now. We're going to dive into this and talk about hiring junior developers is a future investment. It's not for now, it's not for today, it's not for tomorrow. It's for a little bit down the road. Before we do that, let's touch on what makes junior developers, especially junior Rails developers, so special. Well, I, for one, started off as a junior developer. This is me, circa 2012. Cameras were not what they used to be, or I think this was about a 2-megapixel camera, and also zoomed in, so thank you, Facebook, for that. But working with juniors is very near and dear to me, not only because I was once one, but because my first Rails job was working at Pivotal Labs. I was hired knowing absolutely zero Ruby. Zero. Mike DeLessio, some of you may know the name, over at Shopify now, gave me my first round interview, and we paired on how to create an array in Ruby via TDD. I knew what one of those words meant at my interview. But they took a leap of faith when they hired me. They saw something in me, and it wasn't my experience with Rails or Ruby, because I had zero, but it was something else. And I'm forever indebted to them because they were able to jumpstart my career and get me into this amazing ecosystem and community that we all know and love. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. So, more explicitly, why junior developers? First up, they offer a fresh perspective. A junior dev is eager to understand. They ask new questions. They shine light on previously made assumptions that a senior dev or someone more senior might have. They don't really know how it's always been done. So they question it. They ask, why is it this way? Why are we doing it that way? Why don't we try this? They bring that new perspective into it. One of my favorite things to do with a junior dev on day one is bring them into code review. Have them ask those, what might seem like silly questions, because I could almost guarantee that they're going to make that code easier to understand for everyone on the team. Because if a junior can understand it, you better bet a senior can understand it. Second up is that junior developers increase senior developer retention. This is done through one of two ways. First up is mentorship. We'll talk a lot more about mentorship in a little bit, but helping others creates a sense of accomplishment. It creates an emotional tie. I get asked time and time again from senior devs who want to increase their impact, but have kind of hit their limit. What do I do? How do I find out what's next? And time and time again, I recommend them to mentor and delegate. And it shows. Having a strong emotional tie to someone that you've watched grow and flourish and foster, and that you've leveled up yourself, creates an emotional tie to them as well. Emotional tie to them equals an emotional tie to your employer, which means they're less likely to leave. Second up here is that having juniors on your team frees up your senior developers for higher level projects earlier. Think about almost every pull request you've ever submitted. There's probably that last 5% of code that you don't really want to write. Maybe it's fixing CI or making a design tweak, or one of your CSS variables was out of whack, or maybe a test is failing. Putting a junior on that to finish up that PR and then get your senior onto the next big thing goes a long way in creating lasting value and ownership in code for those senior developers that they might otherwise be bogged down by finishing that last 5%. Finally, a junior developer makes easier future hiring. There's going to be a common thread that we come up with through this talk on that the best time to hire a junior was 3 years ago, because this happens time and time again when I'm working with companies hiring on RailsDevs. They tell me they want a senior developer, 5 years experience, who knows their stack, knows their domain, and knows their business processes also. And it's like, what? That doesn't exist. You can't hire that senior. That's a junior who you hired 3 years ago, who now became your best senior. Your juniors will become your best seniors because they are your seniors. They've been groomed to work in your company, to work by your restrictions in your environment, and they're going to produce the best work for you. And if they've started as a junior, there's also a better likelihood that they will stay as a senior because you've been helping them level up. So, quick respite. One of my favorite tweets: I only recruit senior devs. The trick is, I recruit some of them earlier in their career. It hits home really well. It shows that senior devs usually aren't so easy to pick up off of other companies unless you have a lot of bankroll or a really awesome company. And sometimes it's a little bit easier to recruit them when they're juniors and have them level up into your company. So we all agree on this. We all agree on the benefits of juniors. I probably didn't tell you anything new just there. But working with businesses and interviewing folks and talking to people, time and time again, I hear the same pushback. I hear, well, we can't hire a junior. We need someone to deliver features today. Yeah, that's totally valid. Ramping up a junior requires significant work. I will not beat around that bush. There is no way around this. If you don't put the time in, you will not have a good junior developer. I hear that not everyone has time to mentor. Well, not every senior developer wants to manage either. And that seems to be okay. There's individual contributors. There are folks that want to mentor. There are folks that don't want to mentor. I think that's okay. But if you have a junior on your team, you will need mentorship. And you need buy-in from the whole company on how that mentorship works. I also hear that interviewing juniors is even harder. I know, I built an entire business around hiring just Rails developers. I know how hard it is to hire. I know how hard it is to interview. And hiring juniors has its own unique challenges. What I'm going to do over the next couple slides is walk through some techniques that I've seen work to mitigate some of these risks, to talk a little bit about how you can hire juniors a little bit easier, make better guesses on who's going to be a good fit for your company, and how to work through mentorship into your company to make it be part of your system. But first, quote from that guy over there, from Jason Charnes. It's hard to recommend Rails to people changing careers because there are no jobs for juniors. Go learn JavaScript instead. This makes me very, very sad. One of the biggest names in Ruby, in Rails, host of an amazing podcast, is not recommending Rails to people. That's really sad. That shows that there's something going wrong in our community. There's something that's off if we can't recommend Rails to people because they won't be able to get a job. And all of you that are here that are listening to it are obviously on board and want to change that. And here are some ways that I've seen work that we can start to change that culture. So, first up, here are some techniques and stories that I've seen about what works when hiring a junior Rails developer. First up is to prioritize a junior developer's hunger to learn over their existing knowledge. By definition, a junior dev won't have much experience, won't know very much. They're junior. But what you should be doing is prioritizing the folks that want to learn, that can't stand to hear no or to not understand something. The ones that have the desire to improve and be a sponge. You want folks that show up every single day, folks that ask 1,000 questions, fail 100 times, but learn something every single time they write a line of code or watch a line of code be written. To look for these folks, I recommend looking for people that are asking questions during interviews, folks that are talking about Rails in their free time or part-time on Twitter. It's a good indication that they're passionate about it. Seeing if they're contributing to open source projects. Folks that have a blog. Those are also great resources to find folks. And speaking of finding folks, let's dive into a quick story about Jacob. So Jacob was looking for his first job in the Rails ecosystem. He had experience in other programming languages and was doing some other work, but he didn't really know where to start. So he started contributing to the RailsDevs codebase. It's open source, it's on GitHub. He put in a couple pull requests, he committed on a few issues or commented on a few issues and opened up a few discussions for new features. His employer saw these commits, saw how he interacted with me as the maintainer and how he took feedback and pull request review and applied that and learned and grew, even in the public. A few weeks later, they hired Jacob for his first role. This is an amazing story to hear that someone, by just contributing to open source, was directly hired through it. Yeah, he had an interview process, but that was his initial outreach. Continuing on that note, looking at bootcamp graduates, looking at career switchers. There's a term that gets thrown around called second career devs, which I really love, folks that have left somewhere else and are looking to get into development or Rails. These folks show a different type of passion. They've already been doing something and then have spent a bunch of time, probably a lot of money through a bootcamp, in wanting to learn Rails and dive in. And finally, direct outreach. It's one of the main premises of RailsDevs is businesses reaching out to developers directly, and I've seen it work time again. Developers don't really want to maintain a resume anymore. They don't want to apply to jobs themselves. They want to be lazy, have businesses reach out to them. And I encourage you to take advantage of that and message developers directly through email if you can, if you have it. Twitter DMs work really well. It seems to be more open than it used to be. And finding those folks on your own. Next up, we have Rebecca. So I was working with another RailsDevs customer who was looking to hire their first junior developer. They weren't really sure if they were the right fit, if they could handle a junior dev. And they also really weren't sure how to evaluate a junior developer. So we worked together to create a small program. We did an 8-week part-time trial that was paid as a part-time contract. This would be Rebecca's first job as a developer. This would be the company's first hire for a junior. What they saw happen was Rebecca was committing pull requests directly to the codebase. They essentially got a practice run of working with her. They were able to learn her communication skills through async chat like Slack and GitHub. They saw how she was able to handle feedback through pull request review and how she would take that and apply it and learn. And most importantly, they saw her level up over those short 8 weeks and saw how she had the ability and aptitude and hunger to learn. They commented on it as one of the best risk-free trials they've ever done. What they learned at the end of that was that they can support a junior. They had to make a few tweaks. Their onboarding wasn't as smooth as it could be. Their dev environment setup required a couple extra things outside of the brew file. And they had to document more of their code review process so a senior dev wasn't a bottleneck. But they learned that during that risk-free trial that enabled them, that when Rebecca joined, she was able to hit the ground running. Rebecca joined and committed to production on day 1. Why? She had already spent 8 weeks onboarding. She knew everything she needed to know about getting the code running on her machine. It already was. How to submit pull requests. She already did that. And how to run CI. She's been doing that for 8 weeks. All she had to do was go through the HR training and compliance. But her developer side of her as an employee was good to go. So, in summary, how to hire junior devs, what I've seen work. Prioritizing hunger to learn over existing knowledge. Look in interesting and new exciting places to find them. And if you need to evaluate for both as a company and a developer, a paid part-time contract can work out really well and has a much lower risk than hiring someone full-time and having to let them go if it doesn't work out. So, talked about what works, how to hire. What about once you have them on board? How can you work with a junior to ensure that they work best with your team and how your team can work best with them? This might be the most important 4 lines of this whole presentation. Small, well-defined tasks are what enable junior developers to hit the ground running. I go so far as to say, can you pinpoint the exact line of code? Can you submit a change this 1 to a 2 or change this plus sign to a minus sign? Because for that junior developer's first pull request to your code base, the changing of the code is going to be the least of their problems. They're going to need to know how to set up their developer environment. They're going to need to how to SSH or sign in with GitHub, how to submit a pull request, how to approve a pull request, how to get their tests working, how to run the app locally. The list goes on. Once they finally get to that code, they might be exhausted. And if you can make that easy, you're going to be in a really good spot because that absolute first change that developer makes building confidence is way more important than actually getting stuff done. Building their confidence to be able to come back tomorrow and know that they can do it, that they hit the ground running. And, as time goes on, you're going to take off those training wheels. You're going to broaden up your scope of what is acceptable for submitting an issue for them. And they're going to learn more and more and more as you train them. But that first one, the smaller and well-defined that task, the better. Next up is that developer compensation must continue to increase. One of the easiest excuses to leave a job is if you're not getting paid what you're worth. I see a lot of nodding right now. Juniors are no exception. And if you're doing everything right, a junior won't be junior for very long. I encourage you to pay them for their current skill level and the current value they provide to your company, not what they were hired at. This might not line up with your annual review cycle. I've seen companies do quarterly review cycles, even fortnightly review cycles for juniors because they're moving so fast. Their change is so high. If you're doing everything right, you'll be rapidly improving and rapidly blowing through those tiers. Next up is mentorship. It's a scary word in the developer industry, coming from both sides. It has a lot of connotations associated with it. It's a very heavy word. Folks kind of cringe at it if they're not totally sure what it means or are a little scared of how structured it could be. But this is how I think about mentorship, personally. Me as a developer, me as running a business for a year on hiring folks. Everyone's favorite hashtag. Being a good mentor involves two things: being available and coding with people. If you can do those two things, you can be a great mentor. Being available and coding with people is, in practice, practical, everyday advice on projects and code. It's, hey, can you help me with something? I'm stuck. Let's pair for an hour. Hey, I need a couple questions on how this pull request review went. Can we chat for a little bit? It doesn't have to be a weekly cadence where you come prepared with questions. It can be more casual and fun and organic. Those will be the best mentor-mentee relationships and the best relationships that you can create and cultivate in the company. I had a mentor back when I worked at a big bank before I got into Rails, and we met every Thursday at 1 p.m. for an hour. And every Thursday at 1 p.m. for an hour, I had to come prepared with questions. And I was judged on those questions. Those were determining how much I was leveling up in the company and what I was learning. And it was one of the worst experiences of my professional career. I learned nothing from it. My mentor gained nothing from it. And it was a broken relationship because the expectations weren't the same. They were in charge of making sure of evaluating me. I was in charge of showing my worth. That's not a mentor-mentee relationship. The ones that work are the mentors that are selfless and the ones that want the junior to succeed on their own with a little bit of help. It's also very difficult to retain juniors without mentorship. I would say impossible. On top of that, it must be a safe space. It must be a safe space for a developer to feel comfortable, to ask all the silly little questions and get genuine answers to each of them. Every single question that is dismissed is suppressing 10 questions down the road. Do not dismiss a question, take everyone seriously, and offer your advice as if you had that same question yourself. There's a guarantee you probably did ask it a few years ago. And finally, company buy-in. This is a tough one. Mentorship without company buy-in is extra work and not much mentorship at all. Companies need to know, businesses need to know, that if a developer's time working is like this, you can't just tack on mentorship at the end. That's too much hours, that's too many hours, that's too much time. You need to take away coding time, or email time, or meeting time, or whatever you do, and dedicate that to mentorship. And what that means is that your short-term productivity will go down. You will be delivering less features. I like to think of it that the best time for a company to hire a junior is when they can make that sacrifice. They can sacrifice a little bit of short-term productivity now for long-term, maybe even medium-term investment in the future. Come back to this again and again. In 3 years, you might now have a senior developer on your hands. In 1 year, you might have a mid-level developer. And if you can sacrifice that little bit now for higher retention velocity down the road, you're in a really good spot to work with juniors. Last up, the power of pair programming. One of my favorites. Pair programming is two devs, just like this. These are designers, actually. Two devs working on a machine, passing the virtual or physical keyboard back and forth, working on the same piece of code, doing all of that design, trade-off, optimization, feature discussion that goes on inside your head, verbally with each other. This is Josh and Jacqueline. I was there at Pivotal Labs when this photo was taken, hiding in the corner because I was afraid of the camera. And I paired with both of them throughout my tenure at Pivotal. And one of the best experiences of me growing up as a developer was that it enabled me to go from knowing zero Ruby code to a senior developer in 2 years. Yes, I was pairing 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That was exhausting and extreme. But what it did was it took me on a fast track from junior to senior. Those 2 years after I left, I was hired as the lead developer for a small startup, being the only developer writing Rails code on the team. That says a lot about someone who knew absolutely zero 2 years ago. And I encourage you to look at that when you start to bring on junior developers. Can you pair with them maybe an hour a day, maybe 2 hours a week, maybe 4 hours a week? The more pairing you do, I can almost guarantee that the more and more quickly that developer will become a senior. Which leads me to my next point, is that pair programming expedites onboarding. It expedites onboarding because you learn more by doing than by reading. The best way to learn how to do something is actually doing it yourself. So what better way than to have someone sitting next to you telling you, click this button, type in this command, hit enter, and have them going through the muscle memory on your own. Developers who pair program are going to learn the team processes. They're going to learn techniques, how to solve problems. They're going to watch a senior developer do it, and then they can replicate it on their own. They're going to learn how the actual work gets done. Not by reading an onboarding documentation, not by going through the GitHub PR or README, but by doing it themselves, experiencing it firsthand. One of my favorite coding memories, love saying that out loud, is at Pivotal on day one, where we had paired all day on something, don't remember the project, wasn't relevant, and my pair typed in git push and slid the keyboard over to me. I get to hit enter? I get to hit enter and push our code to production? And I'll never forget that even though I didn't contribute very much to the code, I was given that excuse, that excitement of actually getting my code out there and into the world. And I was able to hit enter and see my first real world contribution to Rails, to a Rails app, happen. And I encourage you to employ that same thing. I want someone standing up here giving the same exact talk, saying the same question, saying the same excitement that I'm doing right now. Last up on the power of pair programming is that learning goes both ways. Just because you're more senior than someone does not mean you have nothing to learn. I learn time and time again from folks that consider themselves juniors about ins and outs of Rails. We dive into documentation together. We dive into source code of gems, sometimes Rails itself, sometimes Devise recently for whatever reason, and learn way more than if I was just working on my own. But one of the main benefits to all of this is that in the process of a senior working with a junior, the senior is forced to slow down. In the process of explaining something, they uncover potentially invalid assumptions. You don't really know it until you have to teach it. This couldn't hold more true than when you're pair programming with someone and you have to explain why something's always been done, or why this helper works the way it does, or why view components are better than this, or why ERB is better than Slim, or vice versa. So you actually have to explain it, teach it. So, in recap, 4 tips for what works once you hire a junior developer. Having that first task given to them to be as small and well-defined as possible, and slowly taking the training wheels off and watching their confidence soar. Ensuring that their compensation continues to increase as their skills and value provided to the company increase with them. Mentorship, and how I like to think about it, or how you like to think about it, whatever works, but definitely mentorship. And how much pair programming can you squeeze into a day with them at the beginning to get them onboarded as quickly as possible. Sometimes when companies say they're not hiring junior developers, I want to shake them by their hoodies and yell, where do you think senior developers come from? I love this, but it also rings something a little scary underneath it. If no more juniors are getting jobs, in a few years, there won't be any more seniors. Seniors don't magically pop out of the thin air. No, they start as juniors and they work their way up. I know this was said tongue-in-cheek and excitedly, but there's a lot to unpack on this. So, my challenge to you. My challenge is that you do one of these in the next 6 months. Can you hire one junior developer on your team, at your company, at your startup, at your single-person SaaS in the next 6 months? No, that's too hard. I don't work on the hiring team. I'm not part of those decisions. That's fine. Can you instead bring on an intern for a few months? Do you have the power to bring on an intern for just a few months to help someone who's looking for their first Rails job get some real-world experience, have something on their resume that says, I worked here for X months, to get their foot in the door for their first real junior job? Okay, fine. You don't do interns at your company. You're too low on the totem pole to have influence on this. I don't buy it, but if you say that, can you mentor a junior developer looking for their first job? Can you find someone on Twitter, on the Ruby Friends hashtag, on Slack, on Discord, or all the thousands of communities that exist, and mentor someone to take them from no Rails job to Rails job? Spend the time with them, be a selfless mentor, apply the tasks and the mentorship techniques that I outlined earlier, and get them their first job. Every single person in this room has the power to do that. My challenge is, will you? Thank you very much. My name is Joe Masilotti. I'm the founder of RailsDevs. This is my Twitter handle. This is my email address. This is an open invitation to email me if you're interested in hiring, need some expert pairing tips, or want to share your story. I'm here to help. If you enjoyed this talk, please tweet me or send me an email. Thank you.